Thank you so much, Heather, for that amazing session. We're going to get started with our next session here. Where do all the girls go? I'm going to do quick files and then pass it over to Kathie to take it from here. Kathie Van Lare taught music in the Calgary area for over 30 years. Kathie continues to direct the Foothills Music Society Concert Band and the West Winds Music Society Gold Jazz South Big Band. That is a mouthful. Kathie is active as a clinician, guest conductor, and educator. Kathie is currently co-president of Women Band Directors International Alberta Chapter. Then I will move to Natalie beside Kathie. Natalie teaches trumpet at Mount Royal University Conservatory in Calgary. Natalie has performed with a variety of ensembles, including Altius Brass, the Calgary Creative Arts Ensemble Big Band, the Primetime Big Band, Calgary Philharmonic Orchestra, and the Rodney Marsalis Philadelphia Big Brass. Then we have Kris Davis. Pianist and composer Kris Davis was named 2017 Rising Star Pianist and 2018 Rising Star Artist in Downbeat magazine and is recognized among the top performers in the genre. And finally, we have Christine Jensen. Saxophonist and composer Christine Jensen is one of Canada's most compelling composers. Christine won her 2011 Juno Award for Contemporary Jazz Album of the Year. And I will ask the panelists to please confirm your preferred pronouns as the audience addresses you. And unfortunately, we are missing Audrey Ochoa today. Audrey is based in Edmonton, and she was unable to join us due to the usual thing that's happening these days with the sickness. It was just too bad because she's an educator and a world-class performer, award-winning trombonist and composer up in Edmonton. So we miss you, Audrey, if you see this. And don't forget, and take a lead.
Familiar faces. Good morning, everybody. Thanks for attending today. So the intention for today is to recognize, we all recognize that when we get to the professional ranks of jazz musicians, there seems to be very little representation from females. And what I want to start with to begin with is, I mean no disrespect to transgender and people that identify as non-binary, but for the sake of streamlining our discussion today, we'll kind of go girls and boys, if that's okay with everyone. All right, so a good friend and I were sitting back and going, my jazz band, junior high, I had 50-50 girls to boys. By the time it got to high school, maybe 25%. By the time it got to university, much less than that. And in the professional ranks, the ratios are really quite abysmal. I think we would all agree on that. So what I've tried to put together today is our esteemed panel, and it's a great honor to be here with these incredible, accomplished women. I'm posing 4 questions. Basically, what was it that got you involved in jazz and nurtured that love and passion for it to the point that you wanted to continue despite obvious barriers? What are the perceived barriers that continue today? How do we get past it? And some ideas, some strategies for kind of fixing the situation or remedying the situation. So having said that, basically I'd like the panelists to maybe respond to each of these questions. And if we have time at the end, I'd love to open up the floor to some ideas, all right, and comments. So first question, in your youth, up into including high school, what was it that fostered an interest, love of jazz? And did that change in your post-secondary studies? Who wants to go first? Thanks, Christine.
Hi, everyone. I was on a panel earlier with some similar starts. I grew up in a really musical household, fortunately. My mother found that music was a healing event for her, raising 3 daughters in pretty tough times for her. And she had a piano and a record player in the living room, and that was it. And that's what we got to hang out with, and as well as getting into a music program, I guess. I'm from Nanaimo, even a more smaller area off of it, and the education's really important. The public education system dumped a lot of money into starting band programs in the, I guess it was the late 70s, early 80s, and we are products of that dump, for sure. Everybody got handed an instrument and we all had to play. So that is a nice, I would say, equal opportunity at the time. And then through junior high, we had very supportive band teachers that didn't give you this idea that it's hard or that it's not fun. They were just like, let's play. And they taught us to improvise in their spare time because it wasn't part of the curriculum. And I think that just gave us a place to express ourselves in a very, I mean, the school was 300, I think, and all of us were gravitating to the band room. So yay, band teachers, please get those kids into the band room with positive role models in front of them. And after that, I went to high school. Still was 50-50 in my high school. The same one Diana Krall went to and a bunch of other people, and great band teacher there. Also never saying there's a limitation to this music. Like, you can do this. I mean, there's lots of opportunity in the arts for you. I always thought I would be either a librarian or a band teacher. Now I'm a band teacher at Eastman School of Music. It's great. No, I'm really happy to have been able to take what they taught me, and now I'm giving it back a little bit to some students, I hope, and trying. But, I have been challenged because this position I just got at Eastman is notorious for being a very exclusive school of men only in the jazz program. So it hasn't ended, this battle, and I'm warrioring with the rest of us to change things. It's hard. It's really hard. I think we just have to give as much opportunity to young women to express themselves through the music industry at a high level as possible to make it happen. And that's what happened to me. And lots of hurdles on the way, lots of teachers that said, no, you can't do this. And I think everybody goes through this process, especially women, when they go into higher education. No, you can't do this. You're supposed to be a mom and be at home and be a teacher, actually, which ironically I am now. So that's the story, I guess.
That's awesome. Do I have to use this microphone?
Is it for recording purposes?
Yeah. Okay, great. Yeah, I mean, my story is similar to yours. I mean, I had awesome band teachers. I grew up in Calgary. You probably know some of the teachers. Kevin Wilms. Has anybody heard his name?
Kevin who?
Rob Cicelli was also one of our teachers, and just super supportive and passionate about the music. And like you said, just, encouraged us to play outside of school, and the band room was our hangout room. We'd go and he'd give us free rein to play and explore after school and get together with some young musicians on the weekends and basically have a garage band. We'd pull out the real book and read through tunes and listen to records together. And just a super supportive environment, similar to you. No one ever said, this is going to be an issue, being a woman and going into this field. And I guess all along the way, there was always gender balance for me in my education, certainly through high school and also through post-secondary education. I went to U of T, and it was a very small program at that time. And there was 50-50 gender balance. It's been interesting, like going through this process and hearing stories of other women that have really struggled with their experiences at school, because that wasn't mine so much. But now that I'm a teacher, I'm certainly cognizant and supportive of.
We hear about it more.
Yeah, we hear about it more, these horror stories. And I don't want that for any young person. So I'm on team gender and racial justice. Yeah. There was something else I was going to say, but I forgot. Oh, okay, let's go.
Awesome, thank you.
So, can you hear me?
Yeah.
So early on, as a real youngster, my grandparents brought classical music into the house, and we mostly danced around to Mozart and Beethoven and opera. But on my father's side, my grandfather was actually in a prairie dance band. It was called Rusty's Dance Band in the 1940s. And so my dad came with albums. Like I remember Benny Goodman or Glenn Miller albums. So that was my first introduction to jazz. Junior high school, I joined the jazz band because I knew they got to go on tour. So that was incentive. But I also had a fantastic jazz band teacher. You probably know Ross McIntyre.
Ross who?
And he created a wonderful environment in the junior high setting. You know, there was always great jazz being played at lunchtime. He was one of those teachers that opened his band room and made everybody very welcome. And jazz was just part of the atmosphere. He also brought in amazing clinicians and guest artists. I remember having Big Miller come in and took us to festivals. So Canada Music Fest, we went to Winnipeg and Vancouver, and that's where I got to hear some really great concerts and see the caliber that was out there. And I think I just kind of got swept up in the excitement of the music. I'm like, I want to be able to do that. What I don't really remember is seeing women be part of that scene. I don't recall women clinicians coming in to work with us. Maybe it's just that there weren't any, or that there were, but they weren't being employed. I also got to meet Dizzy Gillespie when I was in grade 9, which was very cool when he came to Calgary. And I just remember how warm he was to talk to, and he took the trouble to mail me a 8.5 by 11 glossy black and white photo of him that said, "To Natalie, love Dizzy."
Oh,
And I was like, yeah, that's a very special framed thing in my house. And people like Jens Lindemann coming in and just playing for us and making the atmosphere really fun. So I also went to music camp in the summer times, music Camrose, and there was a small jazz component there, but the focus was more classical. So then moving into high school, things kind of went sour, I would say. The concert band was a decent experience, but the jazz band was led by somebody who did not know how to create a nurturing environment. And in fact, it was quite traumatic, I would say, for both boys and girls. There was humiliation involved, very little teaching. So I think coming out of high school, I had a big gap in my musical skill. Maybe not so much in my playing skill, but by the time I got to university, I did play in the red band at U of C. But by that point, I think it's like I had kind of missed the jazz train, missed the improv train, and felt like I could identify a lot more with the classical music scene. I had a trumpet teacher who was a woman, which was fantastic. She played in the symphony, Linda Brown, third trumpet in the symphony. And when I was in junior high, I had no idea that was an anomaly. I just thought, oh, I can do that. I guess I can do that too. So I was able to identify with the classical type of pursuit more than the jazz. I also play the trumpet, which is not necessarily a feminine instrument. And I didn't see any role models. I saw Kathie, of course, but I didn't see any role models out there, and there were very few highlighted to me. My band teacher in high school actually discouraged me from going into music. He had pulled my mom aside to say that. Credit to her, she didn't tell me this for 20 years. So thank goodness she never said anything, because I might not have kept going. Then into university, I mean, the men that I did get to play with, they were lovely. They never really made me feel like I was out of place. I just wasn't in place. And I don't know that anybody really went out of their way to help me catch up. So that was my experience. Onto Rutgers University, I actually studied with a major jazz trumpet player, but he taught me classical orchestral playing. So when people find out, oh, you studied with William Fielder, and he was fantastic. I never studied jazz with him, which is a shame that I didn't have that opportunity. But the guys that I was playing with was like Sean Jones, Lee Hogan's, went on to Lincoln Center to play with Jay-Z. They were encouraging. But again, I just couldn't really identify with being able to pursue it. I remember Sean saying, you could do this too. And I literally didn't believe him. I was like, no, I don't think so. But that's been my experience through school.
Thank you. My story, I grew up in a pretty musical household. My father could not carry a tune in a bucket, God rest his soul. But my mom was singing all the time, and my parents were quite a bit older, so they put on big band music all the time. So I grew up thinking I want to learn how to play In the Mood because I love that tune. I'm embarrassed to say that now, but that was a real big thing in terms of my development. I just wanted to play this big band music. I loved big band music over and over again. And I was the trumpet player in high school that could play high notes. So of course I had to play the first parts. And typically the first parts don't have the improvised solo sections. So I kind of said, I sound terrible. I'm not going to do any improv. I wish I could go back now and kick myself and say, it's okay. But I don't recall really having a band teacher that fostered that. You can do this. You can try this. It's okay to fail, right? There are a number of guy trumpet players that were much stronger at it. So I just kind of retreated to the wings, so to speak. So that's my experience. At any rate, question number 2. Ready? Without question, the jazz world has become more inviting over the years for female musicians. What do you perceive as continued barriers in what is still an environment, by the numbers anyway, dominated by men? What are the barriers we continue to face as women?
I'm always first. You're gonna have to add. Okay, you go.
I think there's a few barriers, but the biggest barrier is what we value in our culture and our communities, who we give access, and how we make it available. So it's kind of a broad generalization, but I think, Christine and I are both moms. Ingrid, her sister, is also a mom. I know so many women that, they wanted to have children and they felt like they couldn't because of their careers. And then when they did have children, many of them left the field. And we as a community, as a society, need to do better in supporting women when they have children, when they have families, men and women both. And so that's, at the higher level, I feel like that's a huge barrier for women moving forward. Still, yeah.
It's the basic one.
Yeah, like when we were watching the video last night, I don't know if you saw the
I
film.
wasn't able to.
Yeah, and they were, I can't remember the woman's name, something Singh. Judy Singh, yeah. She was a vocalist who lived in Toronto, and who was she married to again?
Lenny Bro.
Lenny Bro, right. And then she had a child and basically had to feel
Backseat.
yeah, exactly. Be the main child care person in that family.
And that can be a choice, right?
It can, of course, it can be a choice. But I find that I don't know, I'm just trying to figure out the balance of how to still be in the scene as a player and balancing the life as a mother and parent is just, it's so challenging, and I feel like there's so much pressure put on women especially to have to take on all of those roles. And it's not just in jazz, it's across the board. I'm sure you can all,
Yeah.
relate or have someone in your life that, might relate to this situation. And, especially living in America, I've lived there for 20 years now. Women get 6 weeks off of work and then have to return to their jobs. I couldn't even walk after 6 weeks. And I was a musician, so I had to go back after 2 or 3 weeks. And I was like, breast pumping in the car and just like trying to keep it all, all the balls in the air. It shouldn't be that way. So our society should support families, so that in those very difficult times of especially when children are young, that we give families the support that they need. So that's one barrier.
Yeah, that's the biggest, and I was saying that earlier, that it does come from your village that you create, getting that support so you can, our goal is to flourish with our art form. And to say that and put a child in there and a family and the dynamic of the whole thing and balancing it is really, you can see why women don't have children if they really want to flourish in their art form. And that is, it's not a child, but it's a similar idea of just investing all your time into something that is going to grow and you're spreading it out there. So it's hard to find a balance. I guess once I had a child, I was lucky to have a year of maternity in Quebec as a self-employed artist. Yay, Quebec! They've still been the most progressive in that, and that's to do with your taxes, and that's to do with society agreeing that we all need to help each other. After that, family, because after that it's over, and then you have to go back to work still, and just getting into how can you balance your life so that you can put out what you're trying to create while keeping this other thing a big part of your time, because you want that. And I think, yeah, it's the hardest thing about it.
No?
I would say that in general, and I'm generalizing, that there's probably still a lot of stereotypes out there about, in the general public, from thinking that, well, if a woman is in jazz, she must be a singer or a pianist, certainly not a bass player or a drummer, let alone a horn player, and she must have a man supporting her financially, or she must have a day job. Like, this can't be her real job, right? So I think there's some general stereotypes out there, which you can pay attention to or not, I suppose. Again, like you said, Christine, it's a choice.
I would add one thing to that, which is the visual. We've just been in a pattern of the visual being what is jazz, and you think about the visual of what is jazz, and it's the female singer, and the rest of them are men playing. So to break that is probably a big step forward.
Yeah, and also jazz is supposed to be sexy, and so the image that a woman should be, putting out there for marketing is you need to be sexy somehow. Another thing I would say are just like simple things, once you do get into the scene, like lack of change rooms in a major center, and you're having to share a change room with a group of men, and have to go find somewhere to change. That's awkward. You do what you have to do, but why is it that way? Who designs the buildings even, right? And then thinking about touring expenses. So, let's say a man is leading a band and has to put together a group that he's going to bring on tour. Well, it's expensive to bring a woman because she needs her own hotel room. So, I think the solution is just hire 2 women. Or 4. But I think that's also a barrier out there. So I think that there needs to be more money in it for everybody across the board.
Yeah.
So that women can be supported, because I do think there are a lot of men, some of them sitting in this room, who have their hearts and minds and actions in the right place to support women. So, but there needs to be systems that enable them as well. So I think that's a barrier, just money in general.
Yeah, I just want to add to that because that was another obstacle was access. And I've lived in the States now for 20 years. I teach at Berkeley and I absolutely love Berkeley as an institution. But the tuition for Berkeley is $78,000 a year. Who has access? When you think about that.
Same with mine.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, Eastman's 65 plus.
Yeah.
But who has access to it? So our talk at the table there is like, the funding for the student body has to change to support more diverse body in the room.
And I really see the culture changing, especially among young people, like from 40 and under, amongst my students. Like there's real change in the way people are thinking, which is awesome, and I have so much hope for the future. But these big systemic issues have to be addressed. And it's kind of like it's the looming cloud that we don't talk about often in these panels because, what can we do as individuals? And that's what we need to talk about. And of course, it's different between Canada and the US. I know there's more support here, but that for me is going to be for everyone is a big obstacle.
Yeah, I would add to that the access to education for sure. Even thinking about my experience, being sort of streamlined into the classical world in post-secondary, even though I played in the big bands always. But why is there no room within programs for crossing over? That there was no space in my schedule to be able to take a jazz theory class, let alone an improv class, if that was even offered at the school where I was at. So why is it that at the post-secondary level we separate jazz and classical departments so much? Because isn't it all music? And I think to be able to learn jazz theory, it's really practical theory as opposed to classical theory, which of course is important, but I don't know anyone who's out there making a living analyzing sonatas, right? It just doesn't seem practical in the end, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah, Berkeley's the only school really that doesn't have that barrier.
Yeah, we do like quite a bit of crossover, but I think we're one of the schools. Yeah.
But the school I'm at and the previous one, McGill, was there's a brick wall built between these two things. And we all sit there and have many meetings over in the jazz area at both schools. How can we get the other side to, we spend all our time learning their stuff. They don't learn our stuff. How can we change this? And it's a really hard change when the majority of the institution has been built on the other side.
But I don't know about you, but as a jazz musician, we're so multifunctional. When I got out of school, I could, play all sorts of gigs and things because I was an improviser. I had experience in all these different genres, and I was able to support myself.
Yeah, we have to read and interpret. And it's all about interpretation, actually. I've decided. But how do you can interpret this well?
The classical players that I know, so many incredible players, but they were sort of one-dimensional in what they could do. And so when they came out of school, they were like, well, how can I work? They could kind of play for a dance class or work towards a recital, but it was much harder to support themselves. So it seems like, a no-brainer to expand, like you said, those opportunities for crossover, for experimentation and improvisation, which would, make it much more practical.
Well, and I think programs tend to also jazz programs, and I'm not out there in the trenches now, but tend to be limited to the traditional jazz instruments as well, right?
Yeah, for sure.
I don't know what the stats are in terms of string players going into a jazz program.
Well, there's an exclusive thing going on there too, because the jazz programs don't want to take things that they have to modify the program to at this point, but now they are. That's a big change that I think is moving forward, which changes up the whole idea of what an ensemble is too. So that's a huge discussion.
For another time. All right. I know that U of C, my understanding is they're going to do some kind of combined jazz classical approach, and maybe you will speak to that a little bit later, which is kind of cool. Question number 3. But before we do that, I just wanted to say, as was mentioned in my bio, I've become involved with a group called Women Band Directors International. We started an Alberta chapter here, and we're the first chapter outside the US. And we decided to do this because we thought that women just show support for one another. We want to help one another. We want to share resources. So when we can put a group of women together to do those kinds of things, it's kind of cool, all the stuff that we've done. And in preparation for this, we put out a little survey asking about ratio of girls to boys in jazz bands, essentially, and if that changed and what kind of roles the girls were taking. And I just want to give you some of the findings that we found in our responses. We had about 50 band teachers respond. 90% of them have jazz bands in their school. 45% of them were female directors, so that's very good representation. And the survey included both junior and senior high school teachers. There's about 50-50 in that. 35% of those teachers said that about half the bands that they worked with were female in composition. 25% said 35 to 45% were female, and 9% said 75% or more are female in their jazz bands. There was one teacher that said it's mostly all female, like 90% even, because the boys go off to hockey once they get to that age, right? Most couldn't say if their female students would go on to study jazz at the higher level, the next level, like when they went from junior high to senior high and senior high to university, etc. Some thought that most would carry on in jazz. A lot of teachers within the survey talked about how teacher training was pretty lacking in terms of their jazz experience. You know, they played in their school jazz bands, and any professional development they'd done was through workshops or clinics that they'd attended, but there was no real formal training when they were in their post-secondary studies. A number of people thought that instrument selection was a big factor, and we'll talk about that a little bit later as well. We asked about how comfortable they were teaching improvisation. Most said that they taught some chord theory. Some people said that they taught blues scales and would only pick tunes that they knew it would work. Fewer said that they only allowed students to play written solos. And a couple said that they asked kids to improvise and would improvise and hope for the best, essentially, because they really had no training in what they were doing. I'm seeing some nodding heads. Yeah, you've heard this, right? The big thing that came up over and over again was level of confidence in the young women. And I've been doing a little bit of reading. I had a friend kind of make me aware of a website called A Mighty Girl. I don't know if any of you have heard of this before. And anyway, it's a website that promotes young teachers and parents to empower their young women and make them resilient. So there's a bunch of resources and ideas there. And one of the statistics that this particular article I was reading with talked about, between ages 8 and 14, girls' confidence is eroded by about 30% between the age 8 and 14. And when kids, boys and girls, are about 12, their level of confidence seems to be about the same, and it decreases dramatically as they enter adolescence. And I just want to read a quote from this particular article. It goes like this. It says, "As girls approach, the openness to risk and failure becomes buried under an avalanche of biological and cultural signals telling to be careful, value perfection, avoid risks at all costs." All right? And it went on to talk about how as girls are going into adolescence and through puberty, that their bodies are being flooded with estrogen, which means that their level of emotional intelligence goes up, but by the same token, their willingness to take risks go down because they're more aware of the emotional landscape around them. So prefacing that with this next question, The true essence of jazz is improvisation. Do you think that girls are wired differently than boys when it comes to taking risks and improvising? And is the tradition of girls choosing to play more feminine instruments still a factor? Who's going to start?
What was the first part of the question again?
The true essence of jazz is improvisation. Do you think that girls are wired differently than boys when it comes to taking risks?
I'll jump in maybe. So I think we have to look at what age we're introducing jazz and improv to students. So typically it's middle school, and like you were saying, this is when there's like a divergent point between emotional intelligence and risk taking between boys and girls. And one of the things that I've been doing in my career is developing the Suzuki method for trumpet, and it has now expanded to all brass instruments. And the whole premise is to get as early a start as possible. This was Dr. Suzuki's idea that any child can learn given the right environment. And so I do wonder why it's not introduced in elementary school in any meaningful way. It might be that kids are exposed to it through listening, but are they learning how to improvise? Obviously, they're not doing much instrumental work at this point, but laying a foundation at the elementary school level could be a way to invite young girls into that risk-taking at a stage when they're still kids, so they don't have those inhibitions and insecurities that come at the junior high age. I mean, junior high is just awkward. it just is. So I think we're introducing jazz education at the wrong stage. It should be earlier.
That's a great point. Yeah, that's really interesting.
And like boys are, when they're in junior high, grade 7, 8, they're still little kids, really. They're like rough and tumble on the playground. They can fall and get up again, get dirty and messy, and it doesn't faze them. Whereas girls are, becoming more conscious of their looks and, like you mentioned, the risk taking. So there's this disparity happening at that time that I think factors in.
Yeah, that's a great point.
I was just going to say, too, with the advent of social media, they're being bombarded all the time with how they should look, how they should act, what they should wear.
Yeah, I so appreciate your comment. I totally agree with you. Before I was teaching at Berkeley and I was living in Brooklyn, I was teaching young students basic piano. And I kind of had a methodology, and this mother came to me with her 4-year-old son and said, I really want him to take lessons with you, but I don't want him to learn piano. I want him to learn music appreciation. And so I had to rethink how I was going to engage with this young person. And for the first year, we just explored the instruments, we improvised. I had him compose right away. I had him learning Thelonious Monk tunes within the second year, and just like trying to find creative ways to engage with the student. And so I guess I'm bringing this up because along with the curriculum or the canon was also a sense of exploration and creativity through improvisation and composition from as young as 4. And I saw this student, I was at a concert the other day at Berkeley, I come up to the water fountain and I hear this voice, Kris? And there's this boy, and he's like a jazz piano major at Berkeley. He loves Thelonious Monk. He's all in it. So I don't know, it just like kind of affirms that maybe that, like you're saying, that early stage of getting young people involved with the creative process and not siloing the education process so much into the curriculum and the creative process. So it should be, more connected.
Yeah, I think about being that age in elementary school, especially, and how we were taught, we were taught some cool basic things about music appreciation through some instruments. So now I'm going, wait, you have that recorder class and it's horrid.
My son's doing the class right now.
Yeah,
It's horrid.
It's horrid. And then I'm like, what if someone would just put a drone under it and we just like go through the, you could change the modes and the kids could all improvise. When I think about it, if they have 3 notes, they can work with something, work on rhythm, all these things, work on dance and rhythm. And then it heads into, it might be more pleasant for the teacher. They might learn about pitch too. But it's just, there's probably, it's nearly like you need to bring artists in to figure out new ways of getting an answer to this question. But improv I was like, oh, I don't like that word improv. But then again, it's like, well, that is the difference between classical and jazz to me, is that there is no improvisation unless they add that into their canon. It is about execution and mastery and artistry of the lyric, of the music. But in jazz, we go a step further, and it's also part of being able to communicate. I always think of improvisation as communication. We're communicating our ideas right in the moment, and you need a bit of technique for that too. So how can you get that going early and the appreciation happening?
Well, I think what's interesting in our tradition of teaching music in schools is that it's very much reading based from the beginning.
Yeah.
And if jazz is an oral tradition, why isn't our music education focused on that as well at the early stages when it's natural to have that conversational
And
type?
Great classical musicians do work on the oral side a lot more than the ones that are just sort of, they get to a certain point, but that point of break is like maybe they've grown up in a very nurturing environment of interpretation off the page. But if you're always on the page, you're just doing an exercise.
Yeah. Well, and that's how I've always felt, is very stuck to the page with my classical training. And it's really only, getting into the Suzuki world and way of doing things where it's really focused on listening and playing by ear and watching, that I've been able to improve my memory skills and my ability to just pick up my instrument and play. But I see kids are able to do this, and we tend to steer them toward the page so much, which I think is a mistake, especially then when it comes to, saying, okay, improvise jazz and take the page away from them, or make them read chords that they don't understand, or, but I think it's not the right approach in the systems that we have in like junior high school band, play the big band music as opposed to where are the combos at that age group.
And I think also, what is the canon that we're teaching in any given genre? I mean, my son, when we lived in Ossining, it's just north of, actually we were neighbors with Ingrid. That's right. In his town, it's a very diverse community, and the band teacher was awesome, and he would ask the kids, where are you from, where are your ancestors from? And then he would find the music from all of those countries and present it. And I just thought that was so hip. That's what we should all be doing, is being more inclusive of the culture and the people that are in our community.
Any more comments on that one? All right. So we have an idea what the issues are. How do we better support and encourage our young women to get involved in jazz, especially at higher and higher levels? What do we do? I'm asking you. Come on, we got to solve this problem today. I think it's been said that representation is important. It's important for us to look up and see other women on stage.
Yeah, I think when I was in my 20s, I freaked out at some point, even though my sister's doing this amazing stuff, but I could see her, this wall that she was constantly pushing through, and I didn't have to push through it quite as hard, thankfully, because I'm her younger sister. But also you get a lot of, as a woman that excels, you can also get a lot of resources thrown at you. So that's the good news. So we want everyone to excel. But I think it's just, sorry, ask the question again, because I had the answer. That was the hardest question. What was it?
The question I have it, the way it's written is, how do we better support and encourage young women to continue their jazz studies to higher and higher levels?
We have to be present as mentors. And I think that's what we're doing for the most part. And also make sure that there's a safe space that men are also presenting. I'm mostly talking about teachers. The music industry is cruel and at the best of times. So getting all that support to really try to spread it evenly, I'll not describe it, but it is something that's been hard. And then of course, who are you playing with? Like last night I played with 3 guys, but they're my best friends and they are supporting me. The beauty of that thing is it's a collective. There's no leader. There really is no leader. We just bring tunes and play for each other and figure them out. And this is what we're doing. But that's some support that I need for what I'm doing. I don't want to be the leader all the time. So it's finding these people that support you for your art and also push it out with you. That's what I look for.
Do you find that you're often perceived as a leader by virtue of your accomplishment?
Well, I'm mostly the leader. This is the only time I have been in a long time. Or my sister and I co-lead things a lot. And I have a friend in Europe that I do a lot of things with. So the collective experience is very different from the leader. I think I got pushed into the leader experience because in the earlier conversation, we brought it down to spite. No, I'm joking. It's not spite, but it's like, no one is gonna take my music and put it in front of them. I have to do it myself.
Yeah.
That's where I have landed for the most part. And the great thing is it gives me the freedom to do whatever I want, whereas the other role I would have had was being a side musician, and serving the music to others. There's these two sides, and I'd love to find a balance between them, but the other one is such a pull because I'm being pulled into it further. And that's the choice of the world. It's not my choice necessarily.
Interesting. Kris?
Well, maybe I'll diverge from the question just to answer, just to piggyback on what you were saying. When I first moved to New York, it was very difficult to find people. I wanted to be a side person, and I still feel like that is maybe like I'm better at being a side person than a leader. But no one would hire me as a side person, and so I was forced to be a leader. And I think many women, face this in the music world. And there's good and bad things about that. I mean, the negative side is that you really need to be mentored by someone who comes from that tradition. And when you don't get that opportunity, you're not going to learn certain skills. It's kind of a given.
And you also don't have some psychological support because there's a battle that happens a little bit, I think.
Exactly. I remember Aaron Parks came to the Institute and he was like, Terrence Blanchard hired me when I was like 17 years old. He's like, I wasn't ready to play in that band, but he wanted to give me a chance to mentor me. And he's like, more women need that opportunity.
Yeah.
So they learn how to lead a band. Yeah. And
I think Terry Lynn's great at that too.
Yeah, she's very, very good at and aware
Yeah.
that that's important. But yeah, so this idea of being a leader, we're kind of figuring it out ourselves, and maybe there's information missing, but we're kind of finding our way. But the cool thing about that is like a lot of amazing women are out playing and sharing their music with these really unique perspectives, which is why I think so many women are being featured now. And besides this moment of finding gender balance in festivals, there's just really exciting creative music that's coming from women from this time. Mainly because they were forced to be leaders and to try to find a way to make something compelling and meaningful. So I think it's a very exciting time for the
Outside
music.
resources are helping us, for sure, like county council and festivals. Doing what you're saying is, if that hadn't happened, I think it would be much harder right now. The presenters are thinking about some gender balance, just that alone. I'm talking about jazz especially because for the longest time, you're just waiting for Miles Davis to have a battle with Wynton Marsalis, and that's over now. I think we've come up with new programming.
Yeah, and I just want to add that, you know, gender and racial justice is everyone's work. It's not just for women. We need men, non-binary, transgender people, everybody on board to make this change. And you know,
Yeah.
at the Institute at Berkeley, we have about 80 students now. The program's growing, and it's always been focused on gender balance. There's, you know, half men, half women, or transgender, non-binary young people. And that's what I love. That's why I accepted the job there. I'm ready to move on from the women in jazz festivals and the women in whatever situation and work on this together with people that are like-minded, who are looking to create, you know, an equitable society and community in the jazz world.
And also, if I give you an example of that, what you're saying is all our responsibility. I have a personal mandate now that if organizations ask me, for example, the such and such jazz orchestra in, I don't know, the Greenland, somewhere, it doesn't matter where, but I'm just like, I will do it. I'm not asking for parity, which is 50%, I think, even. It's still hard to get there. I think what you're doing is amazing, I wish. But I need to, if I'm to develop something, so I've done it in Montreal and through the Ottawa Jazz Festival, I've created a mindset in my brain, which is called the equal orchestra. And it just means that I might have to stretch the elastic of a region to fill the band with more women, especially if it's a big band. So, and then Canadian National Jazz Orchestra, I think we spent a year talking about personnel, and we are not at parity, but we're getting there, right, Cody? We're working on getting the uninvited invited into the group. And here's the irony, is that a bunch of women that we wanted in the band couldn't do it because they're too busy.
That's good.
So I think getting back to your question of, you know, what do we do for young girls, and thinking back to the way we deliver jazz education, I think we have to look a little bit at what's missing. Somebody mentioned lack of role models. And so I think we need to create space for those role models, like highlighting current women who are out there on the scene, but also historically, you know. I was just poking around, you know, famous female trumpet players from back in the day. Ernestine Davis. She was a fantastic trumpet player. Why are we not showing that to our students? You know,
It's not as documented.
exactly.
And it wasn't supported by the industry.
Right, but it's still out there. The information is out there. So, you know, perhaps needs to be written into the curriculum. You know, women performers. I don't think that it's that hard to change a piece of paper and say you have to teach this. You know.
Yeah, jazz history at the university level is riddled with this problem. I always advise anyone teaching jazz history, just start the first class with a woman in jazz conversation so that you don't turn the broom against you at this point, because this is what's starting to happen with canceling the history of jazz, because there's a whole bunch missing.
Well, her quote on this video was, "Times wasn't ready for us, still ain't." I thought that was still relevant, but I was going to say regarding role models as well, is I think creating space to create role models. And what this means for me is widening the entry point into jazz improvisation. So, I mean, I was talking about like starting earlier with young kids, but the other end of the spectrum, creating opportunity for classical musicians to enter into jazz, because there are more women in classical music than there are in jazz. And so can we not create programs for them? You know, we tried a few years ago, a few years before COVID, to create a few evenings of jazz called Off the Charts, where, you know, it's all about improv and getting your eyes off the charts. And it was women that showed up to that. But why don't we create just more opportunity across age spectrums and different professional levels to enter into jazz? So I think widening the entry point. Including teachers, like band teachers that are out there. You know, if we have a lack of comprehensive jazz education in schools, why aren't we teaching the teachers? Where is that in university programs, that they're getting jazz education in order to turn around and teach it, because they're expected to run a jazz band. So we have to look at what's missing, I think.
I think it all comes down to awareness and education, right? We've talked a lot about mentors and representation. Simple ways are things that we can do in our classrooms, because I see a number of educators in front of me. Pictures of women, jazz musicians on the wall. You know, we've seen lots of pictures of Miles Davis and Clifford Brown and those type of people, and they're still jazz giants, but we need to represent more of our women on these walls in these band rooms. One of the exciting things that I'm pleased to talk about is this Women Band Director International group is organizing a Girls in Jazz Day. It's going to be on January 28th, 2023 here in Calgary. And we've assembled an all-female staff of jazz musicians to work with these kids. And when I say kids, I mean grade 7 and up, all women of all ages with minimum 1 year playing experience. As I said, all female clinicians doing instrument workshops, improvisation workshops. Then we're going to divide them into what we assume will be 2 distinct levels of ability, so they can play in combos or big band. And we are very fortunate in that Christine and Ingrid are going to be joining us that day. So tell your girls, more information coming up very, very soon. So I think, you know, the more that we can offer these kind of programs for our young women, the more they're going to realize that this is possible. We can do this. There's somebody up there that looks like me that's doing this at a high level. Any last comments?
Is that
comments from the floor?
is that day for just for junior high, senior high, or is it also for adult students as well?
Adults as well.
Okay,
absolutely.
Great. Excellent comments.
Grade 7 and up. Comments from the floor. Mimi, you had your hand up before.
Yeah. How much of do you think from you guys' experience is perhaps men's better ability to self-promote? Like, I think that if I had a competition with a male sax player, I would probably, regardless of who's the better player, I would probably have an easier time stepping down, and they would have an easier time self-promoting themselves. Is that something that you've come across along the way, or is that just a me problem?
No, I mean, it's hard
it's a
because
me problem.
when I think back again, coming out of university, especially, all the guys were better players than me. That was in my mind because I was the only girl. It was very difficult. It was a hard underworld to be in sometimes, but in the end, I think jazz is also it's a very long journey. So I just kept at it, despite all this stuff that you're talking about. And yeah, the media has been in favor of men playing jazz. It's just what it was for the history of this music. And now it's changing. So, you know, thankfully you can open up Downbeat magazine and see quite a few, finally, I think this year it started, or a couple of years ago, finally seeing articles about women instrumentalists making it in this business. And they weren't there before very much. So that's helping change the face. Slowly.
I think you make a good point about the jazz as a long game.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm a pretty shy person, and I don't know, I think if you show your commitment and your excitement about the music and show up, you know, and stick it out, yeah. Good.
I mean, there's the jam session, right? We all hate jam sessions, but no, we don't. Jam sessions should be really fun, and you should be able to go and express yourself and enjoy this. This music is full of joy, and all of a sudden, everything I've said comes to a crushing end because I'm thrown onto something that I'm not comfortable with. So that's a whole conversation, but that's a spot too. It's still a spot of growth because despite the situation on the stage, you are working towards something, I think.
So I've got so many things that I wanted to answer questions, but my background is I was told not to be in jazz if I wanted to be a classical orchestral musician. I was super competitive, always was, always will be, but I was very shy, so I didn't want to ad lib. I was telling Natalie I used to leave the room. There were 3 of us in the jazz band that were girls. And we used to leave the room when the guy was teaching ad-libbing, and then we'd come back when they were finished because we didn't feel comfortable. So there were so many things that led to my first ad-lib solo was when I was 50 years old.
Wow.
And I was so embarrassed, and I was just sweating, and I was like so nervous, and because it was so uncomfortable for me. But I so agree with starting it early.
Yeah.
The kids I know that are little are super creative and they're ready. When I was teaching junior high, if I didn't get to them by grade 7, anything that was risk taking, it was too late because the grade 8s were already super bossy and controlling each other. And by grade 9, they were done with risks and they didn't want to start anything new. No, the girls were dumbing themselves down. The boys were in control. And there was no way a girl was going to be in a new situation. Done.
Wow. My mother had the same experience. She was brought up trained classically on piano, and she didn't understand going back to taking the page away from you. She didn't understand how we did it, her children, that we were improvising, and then she started taking improv classes, which I thought was the coolest thing at like 60. And she was like, oh my goodness.
So kids are so creative. Do it early.
Yeah.
Let them rip it. Don't criticize anything. We have little jam sessions in our house with all the instruments in my music room with my granddaughters. They're 7 and 11. And they will play anything on any instrument, and it doesn't matter that they don't know what they're doing. It's just fun. And, I never say a negative thing, ever, about them being creative. We just work on it, and let it live and breathe and be something that they created. Put their art up on the walls. It doesn't matter what it is. Just invite creativity and it'll be fantastic.
Do you know the music of Butch Morris? Have you heard his name? He does a really cool thing called conduction, and I do it with kids because they don't even have to know how to play an instrument. It's kind of like a Simon Says. You show up like a hand signal that means something. It might be like play a long tone or play something fast. And there's a series of, the lexicon is very deep, but on a surface level. Sometimes I'll take like 3 or 4 or 5 of these ideas, and then it's great for like a huge group where you want to make music in the moment, given these signals, and then you can conduct them, and they're all improvising, but they're all following your instructions as well. So you might want to check his music out. He's got a book of his lexicon of directives, and it's called Conduction. There's lots of people like Anthony Braxton, Tyshawn Sorey is doing that a lot now. Lots of great people, but it's a good way to engage with a large group at any level.
Sure.
I just wanted to, I'm not sure yet, but there's just so much. But that I wanted to jump on the idea of we need allies. I was at a music conference last weekend listening to a jazz band, and I made the comment, wow, there's great female representation in this band. And a couple of guys standing next to me said, oh, we don't see gender. All we care about is how you play. And yes, we all care about the music. But we need need to see gender too.
Yeah.
We need to, whether it's male, female, non-binary, trans, all of it, we need to be seen. And we don't see gender is, for the first time I really understood the whole racial line, we don't see color in that moment. We need to be seen. We need to have gender seen by men.
And not as the token.
Yeah.
Or, and because that can belittle
Chicken in the van.
yeah, because that
Yeah.
belittles what you do, right?
Yeah.
Because then you start to feel like I'm just here because like that's
Token girl.
and regardless of whether you play well or not.
That's so true.
Yeah, I was talking to Jody about that last night, and my very dear friend and coworker Terry Lynn Carrington, who started the Institute of Jazz and Gender Justice. We talk about this often, and she's like, I've just given up on men over 50. She's like, I'm not going to change their minds. She's very much focused on this younger generation, where there are young men who are really in support of recognizing the issues, and they want to help, and so that's where the focus seems to be placed right now.
She's so awesome.
Well, we were
Sorry for names.
well, we're
of
not
15.
giving up on the over 50.
It's not that there's no hope.
We all need talk therapy.
We were talking about all these other women that you had asked to be part of. I can't remember exactly what it was, but they were all busy. This was
Because they're so busy being asked to do all these other things.
yeah,
with their music.
doing other things. What though?
Like they're great players,
Mhm.
so they're being asked to. There's schedule. Maybe schedules. It's just scheduling.
Or
Just. I mean, I know Kris probably gets booked up to 2 or 3 years in advance, if not more. Same with me. So when a project comes up, we may or may not be available, but there's a short list and we're off the list. So then once the list is done, we have to go back over to the, I'm putting priorities on great artistry first. And then I look at my list of getting it to be equitable. And the balance shifts pretty fast, unfortunately, because there's a larger pool over here than over here. And I'm going through this pool and it's going fast because everyone's in demand for the same reasons.
Yeah.
Maybe, or they're just in demand because they're so great. And that is the beauty of what has happened, is that we've been able to rise above our circumstances to be strong leaders. And that is the coolest plus about this, to me, in some ways. Carla Bley, she raised a kid, she ran a big band, she's been on tour all her life. Huge hero to me. The coolest person I can think of. Terry Lynn, of course, she raised a kid. All these people, they're still able to keep their eye on the goal ahead of them, which is to just flourish in their creativity as best as they can with the resources that they have. And that involves a lot of risk taking, whether you're a woman or a man, actually. So.
Any final comments from the floor?
Kathie, you touched on something earlier about the ability to teach improvisation. We have a lot of jazz bands.
Exactly.
A lot of improvisation. And one thought is, if we're able to shift some of that towards improvisation, and it goes back to a comment about what instruments people play. I mean, you open it up to any player of any chromatic instrument, basically. You're not focusing on what's in the jazz band. So you can have somebody just play flute, somebody just plays clarinet or string. So is that kind of a way to open some avenues for women into that area?
I think so, absolutely. Absolutely. One of the questions I wish we had included on our survey was, do you allow non-traditional jazz instruments to be part of your band? Didn't think of it until after the fact, of course, but I think the more we can get these young women doing something like that, the better off we're going to be in the long run. Good question, John. Yeah.
Yeah, this sort of plays into role models as well. Like, it's all related, right? When I think about back to the school scenario, a clinician brought in to work with the jazz band, or several clinicians to work with the jazz band, you know, typically it's bring a trumpet player for the trumpet section, bring a trombone player for the trombone section, et cetera, et cetera. But how many of those horn clinicians are women? And thinking about the high school level, you know, kids already know the fingerings for their instruments. You don't have to have a trumpet player necessarily teaching the trumpet section. You could bring in a woman to, you know, on a different instrument and have her teach music, right? But at this point, it's not the instrument that should be the focus.
I think too that part of the issue as well is that we as jazz band teachers, we have to think about the concert on Tuesday and how are we going to make the band sound. And oftentimes the improv part is put to the last little bit, right? Or kind of put aside.
And the time resources.
And the time resources, exactly. All those things. So it's going to take a colossal shift in why we teach and what we teach, I think.
Repertoire probably has a lot of plan to that.
Yeah, absolutely.
So finding repertoire that can really get the student activated in improv at a very universal level across the band would be something to look for.
But I think there's also this culture of, you know, teaching to the exam, right?
Exactly.
In music. So it's the band concert, and it sure better look good in front of administration, right? So that the band program is supported. Or teaching to the festival. I can't think of how many times I've been brought into a school and the poor teacher's like, can you just hammer out notes? You know, whereas I feel like clinicians in general, their skills are being underutilized because there's this focus of teaching to the festival. The festival's coming up, you know, we have to, you know, put on a test.
Yeah.
They don't do that in math, do they?
Yeah, they do.
The allocation of time for teachers also, to do combos and stuff like that, because they won't create a class for smaller groups of people. And but then it just becomes more and more and more on your plate.
So it's already stretched, right? In a big way.
That's where the larger group type improv activities can come in.
Yeah, for sure. I just wanted to, oh, sorry, I'll jump on one thing, because it sounds like some of you are music band teachers.
Who's a band teacher? Proud, be proud, be proud.
Okay. And do you all have experience with jazz? You do, okay. So I meant, like you said, a lot of band teachers that are not familiar with jazz. And there's a lot you can teach from the theory or the books. But I don't know about you, but the one thing you can't teach is time feel. So you're laughing. We see, like, yes. Yeah. The only way, in my experience, to teach time feel is to listen to the music. And that's when Kevin Williams gave me, you know, the My Funny Valentine 4 and More, the Miles Davis record. And I listened to Herbie Hancock over and over and transcribed his solos. That's how I learned time feel. You can't teach time feel from a book. So, you know, listening sessions are super important.
Yeah, playing along with records, picking out the melodies, all that stuff.
All right, well, it looks like we have run out of time. Would you please join me in thanking these fabulous... Thank you so much for coming. Go forth and jazz.
Remember